Live.
This is awesome. Hi, everyone.
All right. So Kelly Sanchez, the head of talent acquisition at DigiCert. And of course, Scotty John, your host. If you're watching right now, thank you for watching. Please like, comment, share, text all your friends, tell your roommates. Just kidding. But seriously, thank you for joining us. And we're looking forward to our conversation today, which we're going to be covering interview questions. And by that, I mean questions that as a candidate, you should be asking to the person interviewing you. So that's what the topic will be, depending on what questions we get from you guys that are watching. If you have questions, please feel free to pop them into the comments section here on LinkedIn, and we'll address them as they come. But if we don't, I think we can make pretty quick work of this. What do you think, Kelly?
Absolutely. I think it's a good topic.
All right. So anybody who's been on these before will know that I have to confirm that I can actually get to people's questions. So I'm going to put myself on mute. Do you have your cards handy?
I do. I was just looking through them.
All right. So I'm going to turn it over to you, and I'll go check out the comment section, see, if we've already gotten a bunch of questions here.
Okay, cool. Sounds good. So hi, everyone. I'm Kelly, and we always start with like a icebreaker type of question. So I have this little box here with a bunch of questions. There's like 365, so we can do one a day if we wanted to. But I'll just pick one out randomly and see. I was looking through them to kind of pick one out of the group, but we'll see what we got for today. All right. So this one says, what is the worst customer service you've ever experienced? Okay. Oh my gosh. I think nothing that is on the top of my head, but I know that there's probably some good stories if I can think about it. But something that I think about, or at least because I used to work in retail, and I love going to the mall. I love shopping. So when I go into a store and I don't get greeted right away, that is like the littlest thing, but I'm like, I can't come into the store anymore. So yeah. And again, that's me working retail, and that's like the 101, just always greet your customer. So for me, that's not the worst customer experience, but just something I don't like. Does that count?
I was going to say like that can't be the worst customer experience.
No, but to me, it just, yeah, I'll think of one. I'll turn it to you.
Well, to your point, I mean, that's one of those things where you kind of really have to think about it. I'm going to flip the script here. I don't know how many people on this website, on this platform, and this platform being LinkedIn, I don't know how many people, are aware or are maybe currently working in what we would call essential worker or frontline kind of jobs right now. But I just know that like it's so tough, right? So if you're serving tables at a restaurant, if you're working in retail, I mean, there's so many examples right now of what we're deeming essential work, and those are just two examples. Obviously, those are both service examples. But it's just super hard. I mean, everyone's understaffed, everyone's kind of overworked. Emotions are running high. There's all sorts of, we certainly don't want to get into it, at least not on this forum, but all sorts of different thoughts about COVID and mask wearing, and et cetera. So, I'm going to skip that question. I'm not even going to answer it, because I'd rather take this moment in time again, if assuming anybody here that's watching us is, either doing jobs like that or has, loved ones that are doing jobs like that. I just want to say thanks for doing it. And thanks for being there and being available and doing the stuff that we deem essential, but, in some ways can be very thankless. So yeah, I'll flip the script on that question. And I think your answer is totally correct, right? I mean, I served tables throughout my career at times. And as hard of a job as it is, there's certain things that, I would hope to see. But like say right now, I'll give these guys a break.
Yeah.
It's tough out there. So
Agreed. Yeah. I like that you flipped it. Good job.
all right. Well, good deal. Well, Kelly, thank you again for joining. So for those of you who are watching right now, Kelly Sanchez, the head of talent acquisition at DigiCert. Of course, Scotty John, thank you for joining our bi-weekly conversations that we have here on LinkedIn Live. And today we're going to be talking about interview questions, but we're going to be talking about questions that a candidate who's interviewing for a job should be asking to their interviewer, right? So I think, the way I look at this, just to kind of tee this up. Oh, last thing I'll say is if you have any questions about this topic or frankly, any other topics for Kelly and I who are, somewhat experienced recruiters, feel free to drop them into the comments section. We'd love to answer them, and they don't have to be related to this topic necessarily. But if we don't get questions, that's what we're going to be talking about today. So just to tee this up, Kelly, again, we're talking about questions that you as a candidate will want to ask when you are interviewed for a job. And, of course, you're not always going to be given an opportunity, unfortunately, to be asked questions. But the way I look at this is it's twofold. One, it's an opportunity, right? It's an opportunity to find out things you want to know that you can't find out through research. And two, just quite frankly, it's a way to look good. It's a way to sell yourself more than maybe even the answers that you give to the interviewer's questions, right? So anything you would add to that kind of framing it up?
I think that's an opportunity. As much as you're interviewing for the company, going back to what you said, it's your opportunity to really find out about what the company is about. And is it a good match for you as well? So you're kind of flipping it around and interviewing them too.
Yeah, totally. So, to your point, and frankly, some people that are listening right now may see that as a cliche. I know you and I, for us, it's stuff we sometimes take for granted given what we do. But I just think it's kind of amazing to me that you can, as a candidate for a job, you read a job description, you of course hopefully do your research. Ideally, you can talk to some people that that work at the company or whatever it might be. But then ultimately, it's a couple of hour-long meetings on average, I would say, and then you make a decision, right? So to your point, it's so important to try to get answers to your questions. And so I think just to lead it off, I've got some thoughts about the why behind it, so to speak. But let's just jump right in. For anybody who's watching, I think that, the value here is going to be, what are good questions to ask as a candidate in an interview? What do you think?
Yeah, I like it.
So do you want to lead us? Because I know before we went live, you had some good ideas. I don't want to steal them.
Never, you will never steal them. Yeah, I can definitely start. And I would say like a good resource too is go on LinkedIn and just like Google and pick the questions that speak to you as well. Like there's some good questions to kind of get a foundation for. So I would say one of the questions to ask would be, why is this role open? So finding out, is it due to growth? Did someone leave? Was someone promoted? So a lot of times people just think, oh, open position, they left or something. It's like, it gives you a little bit more intel about what's going on in the company.
No doubt about it.
Thoughts on that?
No, I was just going to say, like, it's an absolute must ask, right? And it's very rarely volunteered in a job description or kind of in the process without you having asked it, right? So yeah, I think, great question. To your point, you're going to get, the answer itself probably in many cases will lead to more questions or more context, but it's going to give you a really important data point and some things to think about with regard to, to whether or not you want to take the job. Do you want to keep going? And I mean, again, I can, yeah, like I said, you had a bunch of good ideas. So let's start with, let's just kind of keep going with the questions that you recommend. And if there's anything I might add, I will, but like I say, I've got more of a mindset around it rather than specifics that we can maybe wrap up with.
Okay. Another one that comes to mind is, yes, you're doing your research about the company. So you get your perspective of what the company culture and the mission and values are, but ask that to the individual. Like, describe it to me in your own words. What's the company values? What's the culture like? Get their response. And to your point, you can maybe follow it up with, well, what do other people, what other employees, what do they think? What do they say as well?
Yeah, so you're getting some love here in the comments section, Kelly. People are loving what you're bringing to the table with regard to that question, and I'm sure with regard to your first question as well. We did get no, I think you might have just touched on it, but we got a comment basically saying, why did you choose to come to XYZ company? I think you pretty much, it's just a different way of phrasing kind of what you just said, right? But it's an opportunity, for you to find out why the person that you're probably about to go to work for or with is where they are. And of course, in an interview, you can expect that they're going to give you their interview answer. Like they're going to be on their best behavior. They're going to tell you, they're not going to tell you, dude, you don't want this job. It's terrible. Get out. Right. But at the same time, I mean, but at the same time, you can pick up some stuff, right? You can glean some potential like red flags if they're there based on how excited they are when they answer that, based on how long they have to think about an answer to that question. I think all those things are things to kind of take into consideration and keep in mind when you are listening for the answer to that question. So awesome comments so far. What else? What other questions? Like I said, I'm not trying to put you on the spot. I've got some ideas as well, but I know you have a ton. So let's.
Yeah. So in addition to that comment, yes, it's like, what's your favorite part about working there? Why did you choose to work for the company? So yeah, very similar question. So you're a smart one. You're already ahead of it. The other question too. So I would ask questions that are specific to the role. Yes, you have the job description that you have reviewed. You've talked to the recruiter about it, but get it from their words, because they can also give you additional insight on different projects, different things that you may not have read. So asking them, what does the day-to-day responsibilities for this job look like? And then I have another one, but I know you kind of had an additional thing that you were going to say to it. But the other one that comes to mind before we get to that one is, what are some of the challenges that you're going to face coming into this role?
Yep, I love it. And just to speak to that first question you mentioned, right? Like, can you tell me a little bit more about the day-to-day? I think one thing that that you'll want to try to, the purpose of that question is, how much does the answer to that question align to the job description, right? Because to your point, what you're trying to do here is determine, are there things about this job? There always are, right? I mean, you and I have been doing this for a long time. There are always, and the job descriptions oftentimes will say additional duties as required, right? So, which of course is just a blanket for, whatever we want you to do. But you want to find out like how much of what you've read in the job description, in your research, et cetera, is aligned to what they're telling you versus are the things they're telling you that absolutely were not on the job description. And that's one, an opportunity if you have that experience to speak to it. But two, it's also, of course, okay, so this is maybe a little bit different than what I had anticipated. And it gives you more opportunity for additional questions, which again, we want to caveat all of this in saying that, this is time permitting, right? Not every interviewer allows for time. We're hopeful that you're getting the time you need to get your questions answered. And again, I'll speak to some of the recommendations around that here in a second. But I I went off on the one. Again, we're getting great comments about Kelly's stealing all the people who are watching, stealing all of their questions, which is great. This is good. This means you're doing the right things, asking the right questions.
Good.
You mentioned the challenges too.
Yes.
Again, opportunity, right? To explain, why you're prepared, I guess, or equipped to handle those challenges, to overcome them, right? And frankly, if you're feeling like you're not, it's a good opportunity to say, maybe this job's not the one for me, right?
Yeah, exactly. And also it just gives you a better idea of what you're coming into as well. Like maybe the team is underperforming, or maybe it's a brand new team that's growing. So there's so many different phases. And so to your point, Scotty, it's like, hey, I've been in those situations. Yes, I've overcome that challenge. This is what I can do. Absolutely. Because again, you're going into a new role. It's not just going to be like super easy. You're just going to hit everything and like be successful. So
that's great. Okay, what else?
So this is the other question that I have, in addition, again, regarding specifically to the role, is what does success look like in this position? And a follow-up to that would be, how is it measured as well? Because a lot of times they'll speak to it, but you as a candidate need to understand what are those goals and KPIs that I'll be measured to ensure that I am successful as well.
100%. And I would argue that question's more or less totally for you. It's not necessarily a question that you're, teeing up to be able to sell yourself more. So it's to try to understand, okay, how am I going to be measured in this position? And quite frankly, whether am I comfortable with how this position is going to be measured, right? Real quick, I just want to pause and say for those that have joined the conversation, it's probably pretty obvious, but what we're discussing today are questions that you should ask as a candidate in a job interview. I've got Kelly Sanchez, the head of talent acquisition at DigiCert, so she knows what she's talking about with regards to this. She's my biweekly conversation partner. And of course, Scotty John here, you're, I guess, on my LinkedIn page, but thank you all for joining. That's what we're discussing. And again, please, if you have questions for us about this topic, or quite frankly, any others, feel free to pop them into the comment section. Looks like we did get a question from the comments here, Kelly. Let me flip it over to you here. So, okay. Let me just, before I read it, make sure I understand it.
Okay. Sounds good.
Okay. So somebody here is asking, how do you feel about, asking a hiring manager, to think about the most successful person that they've hired and why that person was successful?
I think it's a great question. And because it's giving you intel to the characteristics that is going to make the individual successful in those behaviors that manager looks for. And also you can speak to that and share that as well, if you hadn't already talked about it in the interview. So no, I think it's a good question.
And the reason, to your point, the reason I like it, because, it's very, very similar to what does good look like in this job. But you and I have found this right throughout our careers as recruiters. If you ask a person for referrals for a job, right? Who do you know? And you ask it like, who do you know? Oftentimes people are just going to say, no one comes to mind. I'll think about it and, I'll get back to you. But if you ask them, who was the best, software developer, aside from yourself, of course, in your last job, or, fill in the blank, right? Like who was the top candidate aside from yourself, in your MBA program, whatever it might be. When you get specific, you're helping jog someone's memory. So the reason I like that question is because, you might get a somewhat canned answer if you ask what good looks like in a job. But if you ask them, all right, if you're thinking about the most successful person you've hired in a role like this, what did you like about them? Why were they successful? That just forces the person to be very specific and give you some really usable stuff. So that's great. I love that. Anyway,
good comment.
Great comment / question. And the question, just to be clear, was what you thought about it, Kelly, not what I thought about it. So thanks for sharing.
It's all about me today, Scotty.
Indeed, it sure is. That's okay. I think that's a better place for us to be here. All right. Any other questions? Again, I think that we've covered a lot. And, I think that really for those of you that are watching us right now, we want you to, put your questions in here, whether it's, hey, what about this question? Or, I don't know, anything at all that's related to this topic or others. I want to spend just a little bit of time talking about the mindset I think people need to have coming into this. But before I do, Kelly, any other kind of go-to questions for an interviewer when you're the candidate interviewing for a job?
No, those are the questions that are my go-to, because again, to your point, you have maybe 15 minutes towards the end of the interview. You're only able to ask maybe 2 to 3, maybe 5 questions depending. But if I was to wrap it up and tell you, it'd be, why is it open? A question about company culture and values, and then breaking it down to getting specifics to the roles and what's important to you. So those would be the 3 areas.
Yeah. Cool. Okay. Very good. So yeah, I think, with regard to the mindset that you should have around this is, again, we talked about it off the top. For those of you who didn't join us, right off the top of the live here, you may have missed that the purpose of asking good questions is twofold. The obvious reason is because you want to know the answers to these things, and they're really important. They're often not volunteered in the job description or somewhere in the interview process. So that's kind of the obvious. The maybe less obvious, but maybe at this point, probably needless to say, other reason would be to position yourself, right, as a great candidate. You ask great questions, but then you can speak to, the answers that the person who's interviewing you gives. So those would be, that's just to kind of summarize why it's important. The other thing I would say is, and this is the thing that I think is completely, I shouldn't say completely, it's not thought of nearly as much. And that is, what do you actually like want to know about the job? So in theory, and this goes, Kelly, we talked about it. We should probably do it would take an all day LinkedIn Live for us to cover all of the things that, go into a job seeking process. We're just doing it here piecemeal, but it starts way before you ever get to an interview. The research that you do on the company, on the job itself, if you can speak with people who work at the organization, et cetera, just by virtue of that alone, it's going to create questions. And if it isn't, that's where the mindset comes in. The focus I think you should have is, okay, what do I really want to know that you may not often find out in an interview process? If you think about it, this is an extraordinarily important part of, you're about to go to work, 8 to 10 hours a day for hopefully a few years, right? At least. And so that's a huge chunk of your life. And so, if you only have a few hours, you really want to get answers to all of your questions. So preparing thoroughly, and obviously based on that preparation and based on other conversations that you've had, what do you really want to know? That's something that I truly think a lot of candidates are too focused on. Okay, what questions are going to make me look good? What are the bare minimum of things I want to know? But very, very rarely do you really take that I'm interviewing them as much as they're interviewing me approach. And again, I realize that's difficult because, especially if you're actively, if you're unemployed and you're actively seeking a job, it really is important to just look good. But at the same time, you'll save yourself a lot of heartache in the long run by making sure that it's a mutual fit, right, on both sides. So anything you would add to that, or anything that you would, we've got a couple more questions in the comments I want to get to, but based on just that ramble that I just went on, what would you add, or what would you kind of clarify for people?
Yeah, no, I agree with what you said. At the end of the day, find out what are your important factors in a company, in a role, what you're looking for. And ask those questions, again, cater to that. And if a company has it, great. And if they don't, you got your answer. But I wouldn't like flex or anything unless you can, and are open to it, depending on what it is. Because then, honestly, if you think about it in recruiter world, we've seen it all the time. It's like, no, I really want this one specific role, but you apply to a billion of them. And then you end up taking this position that isn't what you truly wanted just because it offered more pay or better benefits or whatever that factor is. And then you're out in the job market looking again because you didn't really focus or truly figure out what you wanted during the interview process of those top factors that you're looking for. So yeah, that's the only thing that I would add.
I love it. And it does, again, it's like I said, we could spend a lot more time than we have today talking about the holistic process. But that's why it's just so critical. And I'll probably say this every single time we do these meetings, that it's so critical that you identify on the front end of, your job search, what's most important to you in the next job you take. And you want to look at everything that you discover through the process, through that lens, right? Yeah. Okay. That being said, we've got some questions that I want to get to. At least one more question. Okay. So this is a great question. I really appreciate it being asked. The question is, should a candidate discuss salary and or benefits in the interview? And if so, when? So in other words, at what stage of the process should that be discussed? What are your thoughts on that, Kelly? I certainly have plenty, but I'll start with you.
Yeah. And I think this is going to be different. From me personally, I like to get it talked to at the beginning because I don't want to be wasting the individual's time if what we're budgeted for the position is way off the mark. But I know sometimes it's different and you're maybe recruiting someone that's passive or they don't want to talk about it quite yet because they don't really know what this position is all about. So then it's towards the end. But I definitely think it needs to be talked to about at some point and not just, hey, you put this on your application, so we're just going to make this offer, because you have to take into account everything, compensation, benefits. It's a lot more dialogue in what goes into, I would say, the compensation piece. So that's my answer. I know it's not very one way or the other.
Well, so yeah, I think to your point, it's such a, it's the answer to that question, like Kelly said, probably not the most satisfactory answer, but the right answer is it just highly depends. Now, that being said, if you spoke to a recruiter, or even if you didn't speak to a recruiter, but you just corresponded with the recruiter, and this is the first interview that you're in with a hiring manager, and you don't know what the salary and the benefits are, like my recommendation is absolutely to avoid asking that question to the hiring manager, because, and again, this is in some ways, this is really just some self-preservation for you as a candidate. It's kind of in the circles Kelly and I run in, it's kind of taboo to ask that question to a hiring manager. It just implies that that's what you care about, right? That's, if you ask what the best candidate this hiring manager's ever hired, what attributes or traits or experience they possessed, like what made them the best candidate, that signals to the hiring manager that that's what's important to you, is being the best possible candidate, right? If you ask, what is the pay? How many days off do I get? What are the health premiums, et cetera? It signals to the hiring manager that you don't really care so much about being a value add to them, but more so about yourself. Now, the reality is we all care about that stuff. And of course, it's important to know, but it's just what is it signaling, right, to the person you're speaking with? So to your point, Kelly, I think it depends. And I agree with you as a recruiter. I want to get that out early. I want to make sure that anybody I'm speaking with and then sending over to my hiring managers is in the right range so that we're not just wasting people's time.
Yeah.
However, if you are a candidate and you haven't covered that with the recruiter already, I mean, the shorthand for this is go to the recruiter. The recruiter, whether it's an internal recruiter like Kelly or an external, a third party recruiter like me, those questions should be asked to the recruiter, and they should be handled by the recruiter for the most part. Sometimes when you get to the end of the process, the hiring manager is going to want to discuss it. Let them bring it up. That's kind of I think, my take on that particular question. And to your point, Kelly, I love that you brought up total compensation, because that's super key, right? I mean, salary is not all we're talking about here. So awesome. Well, I should just mention, we're fluctuating a lot on the number of people that are in and out of the meeting here. So one last time, Kelly Sanchez, the head of talent acquisition at DigiCert. Of course, Scotty John, you're on my LinkedIn page. Thank you for joining. We're talking about questions you should ask as a candidate in an interview. We've covered a ton. If you're just joining us, feel free to just, watch the replay of this. It'll live forever on LinkedIn so that Kelly and I can see our
live forever. Wow.
Yeah, well, I should say, as long as LinkedIn lives anyhow. Or I guess I
survived the outage of yesterday or whenever that was.
That's right. Obviously, everybody who spends the majority of their time on Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp has now decided that LinkedIn is their go-to, right?
It's reliable. Yep. It didn't crash.
I suspect that most of those people are probably going to turn to Twitter, but you never know. So
right.
We don't have any other questions. Again, I want to thank you as always, Kelly. Thanks so much for coming on. Thank you to everybody who joined us today, who asked questions, who made comments that distracted me and made me laugh as I was trying to multitask here. Thanks so much. And per usual, we're not on next Wednesday, but the following Wednesday, Kelly will be back at roughly 11:30 a.m., not p.m. Mountain time. So we'll see you all then. Feel free to, send us ideas for topics, questions that you didn't want to ask in the comments that you didn't want to make in the comments, whatever it might be in the meantime. Thanks, Kelly.
All right, thanks. Bye, everyone.
See ya.